Hi. I asked if I could dress like a fairy sprite, so I could just be like coming out of the woods. But they said no. Also, just wanted to clarify, Brain Traffic is a content strategy consultancy, and I'll explain a little bit more why that is in just a minute. So I'm actually going to get us back on track for time. I have cut slides, but I'm going to give you a secret URL where not only can you see those secret slides, but you can download the whole PDF. Right? You guys were a whole lot less excited about that than I thought you were going to be. Okay, so just to provide a little bit of context for my journey with content strategy, in 2009 I wrote a book called Content Strategy for the Web. And at the time there were maybe one or two other books about content strategy, but they were really scary to me. They used a lot of big words and talked about things like XML and taxonomies, and at the time I was a web copywriter and I was just like, those scare me. So what I wanted to do was I wanted to provide a really easy elevator pitch for what I thought was a really important topic that nobody was really talking about. So this is what I came up with. Content strategy is the practice for planning for the creation, delivery, and governance of useful, usable content. People seemed to like this. It was non-scary, it was simple, it was to the point. It helped people understand that, oh yeah, content. People aren't coming to our websites for the design or the flash or the interactive company history timeline. So the other thing that content strategy did that I thought was important was that it stepped us away from the what, right? The what are we going to do is a relatively simple, straightforward conversation. What are we going to talk about? What are we going to build? Is it going to be a social media post? Is it going to be a video? Is it going to be a podcast? Because in fact, there are a whole host of other questions that we need to be considering when we talk about our content. Why are we doing this in the first place? Is it for visibility on search engines? Is it for links? Is it because our customers have asked for it, because they need it? Is it to promote our products and services? Is it to build trust? So understanding specifically why and how that's related to our business goals and our user needs is so critical and so key, and we'll talk about that in a little bit later. How are we going to do this? No, really. How's it going to get done? Are we paying somebody to do it? Do we have the right skill sets in place? Do we have the time? Do we have the appropriate source content? How is this going to get done? When is it going to get done? Now, I know that we're all, the answer that we always get at Brain Traffic is, when do you have a timeline? And they're like, yes, yesterday. Well, that doesn't work. So are we appropriately estimating the amount of time that the content that we believe will be required to fulfill whatever objectives we have will need to be done and delivered? Who is the content for? I often say that if your content is for everybody, then your content really is for nobody. Do we have our appropriate audience segments in mind? Do we have user personas in place? Have we done a good job of mapping content requirements to the user or to the customer journey? Who is this for? Who is going to create it? This is also a big question, especially with the content-heavy marketing plans that most of us have today. A big thing I hear from clients is, we're just not sure that we have the appropriate skill sets in place to create content for the digital environment. Or we're not sure which agency to go with, or whether or not we can find the right kind of freelance writers to do this kind of content. That information has to feed into your content strategy and your content plans. What is it that we currently have to work with? Another huge thing we get called in for are content audits, where people are telling us, we know we have so much fantastic content, but it isn't stored in one place. Or people within our organization can't find it or don't know that it exists. Or when we take a step back and look, we find that editorial plans that we have in place for the next 2 months are the same things we had in place 4 years ago. Where is that content? Is it any good? Is it still relevant? Is it accurate? Is it timely? Is it up to date? Where is this content going to go? This can be, we see this oftentimes as marketers as an opportunity where we want to focus on content distribution and content amplification and promoting that content. This comes back around to that why. Why are we doing this in the first place? So that when we are considering the where as part of our content strategy, we're ensuring that the answer to that question is informed by strategy and not simply by because we should. How often are we going to create this content? When we first started recommending blogs, for example, everybody needed to have a blog. Put that blog on your homepage, get the CEO blogging. One of the things that we didn't consider was what we were committing to when we launched a blog. How often were we going to be posting? Did that person actually have the time and resources to do that? So if we commit to any kind of a content property, how often are we going to need to take care of it? And then this was the big question that always cropped up for me when I was doing web copywriting projects. It was what next? What's going to happen once that content is out there? Because a lot of times what I found is that content was something that just got added to the content landfill, which is already what we have for so many of our social media properties or our websites or our multiple websites. Content that just piles on top of more content. So without any kind of a strategic plan for what's next, we're just ending up with content that dies on the vine. So that's where we started 6 years ago. In 2012, I authored a second edition, co-authored a second edition with my VP of Content Strategy at the time, Melissa Rock. And suddenly, 3 years later, our definition of content strategy had gotten a whole lot longer and a whole lot more complicated. You might say there were a bunch of caveats, but ultimately what we found was that the conversation had not necessarily splintered, but had taken so many awesome focuses depending on whether you were working within a content management system, whether you were an information architect, depending on your role in marketing. Were you social? Were you SEO? Were you lead gen? Depending on your role within user experience design. So content strategy suddenly seemed to apply to everyone. And it was for that reason that we were trying to get our arms around exactly, well, when we talked about content strategy, what exactly did we mean? Now, right about this time, another trend was on the rise. That's right, content marketing. Epic content marketing. I tried to figure out how to do an animation where this would go with the Star Wars theme. Do you know what I mean? Dun, 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 dun. That's not the Star Wars theme, but you know what I mean. So what was crazy about this to me is that I had already been coping with and sort of coaching clients back from the edge of, we need more content on our websites. We have to make sure that content is sticky and that it gives people a reason to engage and to come back. And I was saying, what I think we really need to focus on is user experience and content purpose, and making sure that when our customers come to us or our potential customers come to us, we're getting the content in front of them that they need in order to make a decision or get a problem solved. Content marketing and demand gen kind of rose up at the same time, which was the only kind of marketing that's left is content that builds trust, that doesn't talk about our products and services, content that creates goodwill towards our brand and affinity with our brand. Now, I agree with all that. I think that content marketing or custom publishing is important, and that for some organizations it can be a really good idea. However, the way that that was translated and continues to be translated within our industry is this. This is a thing that exists on the internet, by the way. I did not create this. Where more content equals good content. Over and over, I go into organizations to consult or to vet their marketing plans. And over, what I hear is, we're not sure why, but we need more content because that's what leadership is telling us. And you guys, we couldn't deal with the content that we already had in the first place. And now we're being tasked with creating more. And not only that, you guys are being tasked with optimizing it and making sure that it appears in the right time, in the right place, for the right people, right? So more than ever, it's my opinion that the conversation about content strategy and ensuring that we are considering our content from a strategic standpoint is more and more critical. So the good news is that now, 6 years after I first published Content Strategy for the Web, there's a whole host of amazing resources, not just books, but also blogs and podcasts, and you hear about content strategy at just about every single conference you go to. And this is a huge shift. Rand showed in his intro, his kind of state of the state talk, that content marketing and content strategy are the two fastest growing positions within the industry. And there's a reason for that. So I want to take a step back then. There are a lot of different ways, as I mentioned, to sort of address and talk about and consider content strategy, but this is how I talk about content strategy. So when you consider content strategy, Melissa and I introduced this, and it's the quad. It's something we developed at Brain Traffic a couple of years ago. And essentially what I think is powerful about this framework for discussing content strategy is that for the first time it really tied together not just what we were going to create, but also how we were going to structure that, and then who the people were and what their processes were for getting at that content, and creating it and taking care of it, and then the governance component, which is how we're going to care for this over time and make decisions. So at the center of this is the strategy. And when I talk about content strategy, really what I encourage people to do is to make some active decisions about where they are going to focus their time and energy and resources to improve their content efforts, which have to exist necessarily within the larger content ecosystem. So really what that comes down to is this. Any good strategy forces you to make a choice. We are going to focus on this. We're not going to do this. As marketers, we really hate doing that because we love opportunity. We love cool new things. We love trials and testing and so on. And that's really obviously so valuable. But ultimately, we can't do it all. And when we try to do it all, our efforts become fragmented and metrics become shaky. So we'll talk a little bit more about how to set that strategy. So again, content, when we talk about this substance, really this is something that, again, I think tends to be a little bit of an easier conversation for us. What's the story we want to tell? What's the topic that we need to address? What are the brand elements? How can we ensure that the brand integrity is intact? What's the voice and tone that we're going to use? And then the structure is how are we going to organize that content? How are we going to categorize it? And then what are the elements of the content structure that we need to consider to make it work with our back-end systems? And this then is what it comes down to. When we select and make decisions about our content substance, we have to ensure that it's fulfilling our business objectives by meeting our audience needs. And the structure, when we consider that, is that it's got to make content findable and usable for our users and manageable for technologies. Now, what's cool about search, I think, is that your work really bridges those two things. That the work that search analysts and SEO experts and practitioners do is something where you've got to understand how these two things work together. It is a science and an art, and just for the record, I know just enough about search to be dangerous, so let's quickly move on before I make a jerk out of myself. Man, you guys are a tough audience. You're thinking? You're overthinking it? Okay, great. Let's move on. All right, so then we get into the roles, structure, processes, and tools, your workflow. This is always a little bit of a messy thing, especially when it comes to ownership, content ownership, roles and responsibilities, where your starts and stops and so on. And then governance, which is our policies, standards, and guidelines. Governance is probably the #1 thing that we get called for at Brain Traffic, because they're like, oh my God, we have content marketing, and we have SEO, and we have social, and we have CMS, and we have a million different silos working in all these different things, and there's no centralized platform, blah, blah, blah. And we're pretty sure governance is the silver bullet that's gonna help us get there. What can you have to us by the end of Q2? To which I always respond. So our workflow ultimately is what's going to put some structure around our content lifecycle. Doesn't that sound dreamy? And then governance is, in fact, what is going to help empower, facilitate, and align content decisions across all of the different teams, within marketing, within our SMEs, across our different silos. So let me step back and provide a little bit of clarification. Remember I said that that big long definition that we decided we needed to introduce in 2012, which was really 14 definitions. This has really been kind of keeping me up at night. Some people worry about like taxes or the government, and I worry about content strategy. And I really kind of was able to break it down into 3 different areas of content strategy, and so this is sort of how I end up talking about it. We did call it content strategy for the web because our publisher wouldn't let us change the 2nd edition title. But really when I think about it now, I talk about it in terms of content strategy for user experience. This is where we're really talking about how content plays a role in what our customers experience when they encounter us across any of our digital properties. So I really love this graphic. This is something that was published by IBM like in the early 2000s. Forward thinkers, and you can kind of see here's where content strategy plays a role. I love that they include usability and accessibility, which is something that we kind of tend to run over in our rush to get to the next great thing. UI, user interface, understanding and making smart decisions about our platform selections, how things are going to function, and then that all-important information architecture. So that's the first piece. The second way that I talk about content strategy is adaptive content strategy. And I saw this on Twitter recently. Ethan Marcotte is the guy that invented responsive design, and he showed a clip of something he was IMing with someone where he said, I'm really sorry, I know this is rough, is there anything I can do for you? And the response was, yes, you can roll back time and not invent responsive design, because that has completely messed with our jobs and our processes and everything else. It's a great thing, but ultimately we do need to be thinking about content components and tagging and how those are going to be delivered and searched for, and how they will turn up across different platforms and devices. And then finally, this thing, enterprise content strategy, which is really not necessarily an area that we all get to play in, because this is something that oftentimes has everything to do with organizational structure, change management, leadership, and overall sort of operating principles. This is included in the slide deck. You guys can go and read, enjoy it for a little bit of bedtime reading. But it really does sort of cover all of the different parts of how content operations and that substance and planning and editorial and so on all come together within that governance piece. It's really a good messy thing that I love to mess around with. Okay, so yeah, let's get to this. So there are really 4 parts to getting content strategy done that I work with, and that I would encourage you guys to consider too. The assessment and analysis of the content and of the content ecosystem of your customers, your stakeholders, the tools you have to work with, the content you already have, etc. Analysis, which is getting back with your key findings and insights about what's working, what's not, and where the opportunities are. And then strategy, which is we can do all of these things, but we're going to focus on these things to have the most impact for our customers and on our bottom line. Architecture and editorial, which really get at that substance and structure piece. Implementation, which is how are we going to get this stuff done. And then maintenance, which is the plan for what happens next. So we're going to tackle the first 2 parts here, assessment, analysis, and strategy, and architectural and editorial. These are the 2 things that we typically can play in. Again, oftentimes our roles or our jobs, we sit in areas where we don't have control over all of this stuff, that we have focused control. And so as I go through this, I want you guys to really be thinking, what can I bring to the table here? What should I be bringing to the table? What meetings are happening that I'm not being invited to that I need to gently introduce myself into so that I can help the folks who are making decisions in these areas make good decisions, better decisions, smarter decisions that will help make this content findable and more visible across channels and properties. So when we get into any sort of a discovery checklist when we're designing digital properties or undergoing, digital planning, these are oftentimes the discovery questions that get asked. These look familiar to you guys: business objectives, project objectives, cross-platform initiatives, design research, all this good stuff. For me, one of the most powerful things about a content strategy framework are the questions that get asked in this phase, because oftentimes what I find is that what causes 11th hour meltdowns when we're building any kind of digital process is that smart questions weren't asked up front. And so those are the things that come back to bite us in the end. So what I recommend to people is that they come to the table not only with typical, what is your role, what do you do, what's important to you, what's working, what's not, but questions that are going to help us focus in on opportunities and challenges that exist with the content itself, with content planning, and with the content processes. Content rot is something that oftentimes will come at us when we do an early content inventory, and it's redundant content, outdated content, and trivial content. I think that's so clever. I did not make that up. I wish I did. Again, man, what is wrong with you guys? I mean, that was not like hilarious, but at least like a courtesy laugh. Jeez. Okay, so after we get to all of this, we write up our assessment and our analysis, and we get to dun-dun-dun, the strategy, the thing that everybody's super excited about. Woohoo, strategy! Okay, so here is a sample content strategy. We'll deliver the right content to the right person in the right time, in the right place. Do you guys recognize this strategy? Is this your strategy? This is the strategy I get handed 90% of the time as I walk through the door. And it's at this point that I think I gotta talk to these people about strategy. Strategy was another thing that kept me up at night for a really long time. And because there's a lot written about it, it's confusing, what's marketing strategy, business strategy, and so on. And this was finally sort of what helped me boil it down. So let's say that you're a bear. And as a bear, you have some fundamental goals in life, right? The primary one is which, of course, to survive. But you gotta sleep, you gotta hibernate, you gotta reproduce, and of course, you gotta eat. So in this instance, we're gonna focus on that primary goal, which is eating, to be sustained. Now, to fulfill this goal, you have a couple of different options, right? You can go forage for berries, you can go, or small animals or whatever bears eat. You can go look in the campground to see, if there's anything in there that you can rummage around and eat. Or in this instance, you can go down to the river to get fish. So this bear, you guys have chosen, your strategy is to go down to that river, to travel to the river, and to find fish, to eat fish, okay? So in this instance specifically then, you also have a bunch of different ways that you can go after that fish. You can go swim into the river and try to catch it, right? You can go along the side of the river and see if there are fish close to the shore that you can kind of get at. Or you can go and stand in the middle of the river and open your mouth and wait for a fish to jump in, which is what the tactic is here. So, okay, so we've got our goal, which is to eat. We've got our strategy, which is to go down to the river. And then we have our tactic, which is to stand in the middle of the river with our mouth open, hoping that a fish will jump into it. So in this scenario, if we take away the strategy, and we're left with our goal and our tactic, then we might as well be sitting in a field with our mouth open, hoping that a fish will fall from the sky. There you go. So I feel like oftentimes we're operating like this, right? Well, let's hope this works. We're going to sit over here and try it again over here. What are our metrics? So these are a few actually effective content strategies. And again, these things force us to say no. We're going to use our website as our primary vehicle to gather and capture qualified leads. All right? So we're going to ensure that our website is usable. We are going to point to our website from our social media properties. We are going to focus our search efforts on our website specifically. We are going to ensure that our website is responsively designed. Okay? So these are decisions that we make as an organization, as a team, that force us to say no to other things. Or we'll evolve our print production model to deliver single source omnichannel content. Well, now we're looking at our technology platform. Now we're looking at content structure. Now we're looking at a content audit to ensure that we have all our content types. These are specific activities that we need to focus on. So when you go to document your content strategy, these are the things you absolutely need to have in place. Anything that's missing, if something is missing here, it's not a strategy. It's a good idea, or it's a half-baked plan. And when we make decisions within marketing, hopefully there is something like this that is directing our efforts, or that's providing guardrails for our efforts. I rarely see this within an organization, and it's a tough thing to get to because it requires a substantial amount of alignment. But again, this is something that we can participate in simply by coming to the table and asking good questions. So here's a really pretty framework that you can use. And in the secret PDF, I also have a bunch of different examples of introductions to the content strategy document, what your analysis structure can look like, and so on. Okay? I have 3 minutes to catch up. That's not going to happen. All right, so then we get into architecture and editorial. Now, oftentimes, this is what we see. When we are creating anything, these are the different pieces that are going into our build process or into our day-to-day activities. However, when we are talking about content strategy, these are the pieces that are often overlooked, or they're an afterthought, or they're unclear, or they're fragmented. So within our content strategy toolkit or implementation plan, these are things that need to be addressed. Now again, in the secret PDF, I have lots of different examples of this, which frankly would be really boring to walk through up here because it's kind of small type, which Erica really gave me hell for appropriately. But if you want a shortcut, there's this amazing new book called the Content Strategy Toolkit that has collected and curated more examples than I've ever seen in one place. So you might want to check it out. There are free chapters out there. So then we get into the implementation and maintenance, or as I like to call it, the hard stuff. This is where politics come into play. This is where resources come into play. This is where the difference between demand gen and lead gen comes into play. Because this is where we need to make decisions about what's working and what's not. And as Rand was talking about, be brave and kill the stuff that isn't. Kill it, admit defeat, whatever you need to do to innovate. And also in the governance piece, who gets to say no? Moving forward, if we come to the table with ideas or things that maybe are just alongside of the strategy or things that we think might help us in other areas, right? Who gets to rein us in? Who gets to say, this is what we've chosen to focus on now? Now, do I think that this framework completely eliminates the opportunity for innovation or for creativity or for spotting new opportunities? Absolutely not. Those have to be a part of our everyday work. However, what I think is important is that as marketers, we tend to become subject to the bright, shiny object syndrome, where instead of really seeing through activities that we've been working towards and building on, we suddenly will think, oh my God, there's a new platform over here, and we absolutely have to be on it right away. I spoke at a marketing conference several years ago where I asked people, how many of you know what content you have within your organization and where it lives? And it was an audience about this big, and I had 3 people raise their hand. And then I said, how many of you are on Pinterest? And I swear to God, every single hand in the place went up. And I just wondered, how many of you should be on Pinterest? How many of you have brands where that actually makes sense? How many customers actually, or potential customers, actually care to find you on Pinterest? Those are the kinds of things that a solid content strategy can help you look at clearly and make brave decisions about what you are going to do and what you're not going to do. So how do you make the case to go backwards with the clicker? Huh? God, again. How do you make the case for content strategy? This is the #1 question I get asked at conferences, because a lot of times people know that it's important, but they can't get anybody to listen, or they've put together their deck, or they've downloaded one of my decks and they've done a roadshow of it within the organization, and they're just not getting the kind of buy-in that they're looking for. The #1 way that you can make the case or get buy-in for content strategy or for investing in content strategy, both time and resources, is to talk about pain points. Figure out what your boss or your boss's boss cares about and what's hurting them and what they are wishing they could get fixed, or where the process is breaking down, or where things seem to continue to get messed up within the content process. Where is it that it hurts? And then step back and figure out how one of the pieces of the content strategy process might be able to deliver a smart solution. And start there. Start small. Same with unanswered questions. The number of times I see us making decisions based on assumptions, like not just a few decisions, but a whole lot of decisions, entire campaigns based on assumptions, makes me nuts. So if we can get in there and identify what are those unanswered questions, where do we have an opportunity to ask some of these smarter questions about content, oftentimes that will buy us the time and the resources that we need to be able to go ask those questions. And it doesn't need to be some huge, well-funded research project. Sometimes it can just be getting the right people around the table and asking questions that nobody else has before. And then there are, of course, the opportunities. And I'm not talking about the content marketing opportunity here. I'm talking about opportunities to improve the quality of our content, not just in a way that we think is better, but in an industry-wide way. How can we competitively differentiate with our content? Really, truly differentiate. You guys are always looking for ways to improve findability of your content, to improve visibility. Where are those opportunities? And how can understanding more about our audiences or our clear business objectives help you to prioritize and focus those opportunities? And also, are there opportunities to cut costs, to create new efficiencies within our content processes internally? Where are those opportunities? Can you spot them? Can you articulate them? That's an easier thing to sell up. So my final question to you is this. You guys sometimes do live in silos that are frustrating, because you see and you know and you understand from a best practices perspective, God, if only everybody who's creating content and who's delivering content would check in with me or let me participate in that conversation so that I can bring my clear expertise to the table, or bring the new insights that I've gathered from MozCon and help shape our content creation and maintenance process. Use this approach, use this framework. Work hard to tie in from a holistic standpoint all the different pieces that have an effect on our content products and processes that exist within our companies and for our customers. It's up to you guys to shape this conversation, to bring it to the table, and to advocate for your user needs, your customer needs, for responsible metrics, for meaningful metrics, and ultimately for the entire thing that content strategy comes back and focuses on, which is, what are you going to do? What are you not going to do? And the stuff that you are going to do, how are you going to kick ass at it? Thanks. Woo.
That was awesome.
Thanks. Okay, this is a really important slide that we actually need to keep up.
Okay, let's leave that up. Let's leave that up. We're going to take a couple questions here.
Good. You can take me right off that screen.
Yes.
Damn.
So this is the URL that people can go to and download the PDF.
Yep. And if you guys have Wi-Fi access and anybody wants to try to do that right now and then let me know if it's working, that would be fantastic.
Okay, so I'm an old school SEO, right? And a lot of old school SEOs in this audience were very slow to evolve sometimes. So I thought this was a really good question from Evan Davis. My clients want calls and their customers don't read content. So we make content to rank. I bet you hate that question. So how does content strategy apply?
When you're making content to rank? Well, I think that, what I've always said in the world of search is that oftentimes we're measured on page rank, and that's what our clients are looking for, and that's what our clients count as a success. But ultimately, if people click on that and they don't find what they're looking for, or the content sucks, they're gonna leave, right? Going back to search results is a click, or it's a swipe. So content strategy, I think, can help. Sorry, I'm talking to you. No. Content strategy, I think, can help by ensuring that that content is quality and that it is meaningful. And ultimately that it does, I know that a big tenet of content marketing is that don't use content to market your products or services. Use it to build your authority as a trusted thought leader in the space. But I think, again, ultimately, people want pretty specific things from you as a brand. And if you're creating content just for the visibility, if they get to it and it's not meeting those needs, then it was, a nice idea.
Yeah, I think a lot of us, even at Moz, we sometimes struggle to create content that is actually valuable to people. And I have a question here. When you say less content, but engaging content, do you have any good examples of that?
Now, I didn't say engaging. I think, or if I did say engaging, I take it back. Because I think that engagement is a pretty lousy metric. And I think it is a metric that we've leaned on because we're not sure what else to measure. So we measure shares, and we measure clicks, and we measure likes. But ultimately, those are pretty cheap to come by, I think, because it doesn't do anything to assess intent, right? It's just kind of a wave, or it's just kind of a high five. So I'm going to answer the question more, what do I think makes content quality content, or useful content, or content that actually drives our customers through and drives them deeper into the funnel. Again, I think it's content that addresses a specific need or task, which is pretty unsexy, right? I mean, the content that I'm looking for, 9 times out of 10, if I'm thinking about a product or a service or how to solve a problem, is specifically how to solve a problem or how to make a decision. Yeah? And so I think that when we create content about, like, we sell, I don't know, paper products, so we're gonna create a series of good ideas for a picnic. What? Right? I wanna know maybe where you're sourcing them, or mine were moldy and who do I call? I mean, I'm sorry, I've never had moldy paper products.
Okay, another question we had, final question for you. A lot of people in this room are very heavily involved in content promotion. We didn't get into it very much in your presentation here. Is that very much part of your process, or is that more outside the process?
I've been thinking a lot about content promotion. And I'm really unclear about why we would be promoting our content versus our products and services. I kind of don't get that. I mean, I want, God, you guys hate my guts. Because I just think that promoting content, that's kind of a part of this idea of demand gen. And for me, that's just advertising and promotion, except it's for our content, and if our content is just supposed to be building brand goodwill, then that's kind of, isn't that what advertising has done for a long time?
Let me play devil's advocate, and maybe just so we're on the same page.
Yes.
But what about getting eyeballs on the content that you create?
So?
Is it important?
I mean, what's important is brand goodwill, right? And gathering leads and lead conversion, right? And brand goodwill, I think, is important. It's really tough to measure. But for me, brand goodwill really happens at the service level, at the customer service level, or at the product level, right? I mean, Dana had some great examples. If you guys have great content, but then your service sucks, like, I'm not gonna buy you because of your content. Now I'm just depressing everybody. You know what's hilarious is that I'm giving the keynote at Content Marketing World. Right? Bring your tomatoes to throw.
Yeah. That is awesome. Kristina, we're so glad that you joined us here today. I hope we can have you back another year. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of questions in the lobby. Please give a warm hand for Kristina Halvorson.
Great, thanks.